Ladies and gentlemen, we do thank you very much for your attention, and now we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Welcome to our top travel destinations. I am your host, Kevin Flanagan. I have been editor of the weekly travel news column in the Sunday Independent and the Fine Wine and Food Guide, and I am here to use my decades of experience to help you know exactly where to stay, eat, drink, shop and explore when visiting the world's top travel destinations. So sit back and enjoy the wonders of travel as we take off on our magical journey together. Welcome to the top travel destinations. I am delighted to have an old friend and a colleague who I've traveled right across the world with, Philip Nolan, who is a columnist and travel writer with the Irish Daily Mail. He's actually been Travel Journalist of the Year twice. So, Philip, so happy to have you on our show.
Lovely to be here, Kevin.
I think back to two memories actually, of flying with you business class with Cathay Pacific to Hong Kong only a few years ago.
Yes, it was 2018 for the Rugby Sevens. It was brilliant.
Yeah, yes, and we had a ball, literally.
That was a great trip.
Yes, that was a great trip. And this is one of the upsides of being a travel journalist. And Philip really knows the world in really great detail. And if you follow him on Twitter, he's Philip Nolan 1 on the Twitter platform. You'll know all about his incredible cocktail recipes, his cooking, and he's always fun to follow. So today, Philip, what is your chosen destination which we're going to take people by the hand and give them a virtual tour of?
Yeah, today I think we're going to be in Orlando, in Florida, which is one of my favorite places on earth. I've been there 15 times. The first time was 1986, because I had cousins in the States who had always been banging on about Disneyland in California. And then, of course, Disney World in Florida opened in Orlando, and I just wanted to see Disney. And then after that, Universal parks were built, and in terms of white knuckle rides, they're much better, because I love roller coasters. So that's my fascination with it. I had family there as well. Sadly, my aunt, who was in her 80s, she died last year. So the family thing is kind of gone now. But yeah, it's just a wonderful place for a holiday.
Wow. And how do you stop yourself getting sick on big roller coaster rides? Because I do suffer from that.
It's kind of weird because I'm not terribly fond of heights. And so the kind of slow climb up that first hill can be dodgy. And I will freely confess that sometimes I do actually close my eyes for that bit. But the speed is what I really absolutely love. And there's a new one opened in Universal Studios 2 years ago called the Velocicoaster, based on Jurassic Park. And it has two high-speed launches and just some incredible elements. At one point, it goes up to about 100 kilometers, 110 kilometers an hour. And it goes into what we call a top hat. It's a hill that literally shoots straight up over the top and then down the far side. And then immediately after that, there's a total inversion. And I don't mean a loop. The track itself is actually upside down. So with only a lap bar keeping you in your seat, you actually are upside down as you cross a public walkway. And you literally feel like, this is it, I'm going to die. But that's the fun of them. To me, it's the safest way to contemplate your own mortality, because these are massive corporations. Safety is key. If anything happened, the parks would be closed, and that's a massive revenue stream gone. So you absolutely know for sure that you're safe.
Now, I'd have to also add that Philip is the motoring correspondent as well. So you're used to speed. You have a different car every week. Does that play into this idea of speed and adventure?
Yeah, I think it's about thrills, no matter which way you get them. I mean, I would like to immediately and hastily point out that I do not break the speed limit because I value my license. But that said, I'm lucky enough to maybe, at least once, if not a few times a year, to actually be at car launches in Germany. And when you're on the Autobahn, the sections that are unrestricted, I mean, I think the fastest I've ever driven personally at was 286 kilometers an hour, and that's perfectly legal on a German road.
And what car were you driving on that?
It was a BMW 6 Series of some description, if memory serves me, and I was exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. And I did it for like 2 kilometers. It was just to see how far I could push it, because it's an amazing thing. But you also want to make sure. Germany's probably the only place where you can drive at that speed and then suddenly get overtaken. but because you are very conscious of the fact that at that speed you're doing basically you're doing a kilometer every, 15 seconds?
Wow. So part of the thrill of you going to Orlando is the rides.
100%. There are three kind of main park areas in Orlando. You've got Disney World, obviously. You have Universal Studios, which now has 3 parks. And you have SeaWorld. And SeaWorld now is adding a lot of new roller coasters to actually keep people coming, because they've obviously had issues in the past with keeping whales and stuff in captivity. So they're trying to minimize the animal level of the park and make it more of a kind of a thrill ride park. And then as well as that, you also have Busch Gardens in Tampa, which is like 90 miles down the interstate. And that's another fantastic theme park. 2 of my favorite roller coasters in the world are actually in that one. So there's lots to do.
Wow. Give us a taste. So to prompt our listeners, particularly me, who'd be a little bit timidly minded when it comes to this, what would be in store for me?
Well, there's one, it's a relatively new one. It's called Cheetah Hunt. And basically, it's another launch coaster, but it's also one of the longest coasters in Florida. I think in real terms, it's longer than a kilometer. And there's only one inversion on it, which is unusual. But the great thing about that is speed. And because it's actually trying to echo the movements of a cheetah, there's one brilliant section towards the end that's basically in a ravine. And there are lots of very high-speed changes of angle. So 1 minute you might be right down on your right-hand side, and then the next minute you're on your left-hand side. So it's this kind of motion as you go forward, which is absolutely fantastic.
And are you chasing anything? Is
No,
there a
you're
visual?
not. No, there's no visual at all.
Okay.
And then the other one is called Montu. It's a suspended coaster, so you're hanging from the track. And again, there are some brilliant elements on that, especially if you're in the front row, because there's one point where you're literally hurtling towards a blank wall, effectively. And because you don't see the track above you, just at the last minute, you're actually like whipped up in the air to do the outside of a loop. But for one horrible second, you do think maybe I'm going to hit this wall at 100 kilometers an hour kind of thing. There have been days when I've been in parks in Orlando and in Busch Gardens where I've suddenly realized that I have actually been upside down maybe 40 times that day because I've gone on so many rides over and over again. I think a lot of it's down to the weather is great, the heat. You're going around in shorts. There are all different types of coasters. There are some that are suspended from the track, others on the track. There's one called Manta in SeaWorld where your ankles go into 2 little hooks, and then effectively you conduct the whole ride literally face down. There are coasters where you stand all the way around. So there are a million different ways to actually get your thrills. There's one in SeaWorld as well called Mako. The first drop is over 200 feet. People who like coasters will know airtime is what we call that bit where you're actually ejected from your seat, but the lap bar keeps you in. It's always very funny if there are women in front of you with long hair, because at the top of the hills, their hair literally rises as if it was being attracted by a helium balloon or something. But there's brilliant airtime on that coaster. And again, you'll feel like you're going to be thrown out of the seat. It's fantastic.
Let's say that people listening to this podcast from all ages and backgrounds, what would it be about the theme parks that would really light a fire if they don't know anything about them?
If they don't know anything about them, they might think that it is all about the white knuckle rides, and that actually is not the case. I mean, in many of them, there are daily shows. Like in Disney, for instance, there's a Lion King show every day, which is suitable for all the family.
Is that the full show?
No, it's just a kind of a 30-minute version of it. There are lots of what they call 4D cinemas. So these would be rides where when you're watching the screen in 3D, your seat is also moving. And then if something in 3D, like water, is coming out of the screen, water will come down out of the ceiling. It's a much more immersive experience than just the film itself. And equally, food, it's America. Food is hugely important. And there are lots of dining options in all the theme parks. And then I think as well, the one thing I always notice when I'm there is there always seems to be a lot of family groups in the States especially go, and you often see people who are obviously grandparents who are just delighted at watching their children and grandchildren on the rides, and usually end up, of course, minding 6 or 7 rucksacks while the others go on. The great thing as well, incidentally, is if people are going there, let's say a couple with younger children, there's a single rider line on most of the rides. So one parent can stay with the children while the other goes on and kind of skips the queue, and then vice versa. Let's say a coaster is 4 seats across and there are only 3 people together, then that one seat doesn't go empty. So there's always an adult in the single rider queue. In fact, I use it myself because I'm often there by myself, and it's great. So it speeds up the whole process. And incidentally, in each of the parks as well, you also can pay extra for the front of line access, which I would highly recommend if you have the money, because sometimes at weekends especially, it's just so crowded you could queue for an hour at least for some of the rides.
And what are we looking at cost-wise to get into
It depends. I mean, there's a lot of good value if you buy longer tickets. I mean, there's a Disney ticket that you can buy, I think, for 14 days that gives you unlimited access over the 14 days. But by and large, it's expensive. You're looking at $110, $120 per ticket per day. So it's not cheap. But then I guess, it's not just the rides. It's not just the shows that are on. Every single evening, they have the most spectacular displays in Universal, in the wizarding world of Harry Potter. They have this incredible light show on their Hogwarts castle every night with lasers and projections that change, and they've got fireworks. It's funny because my aunt, who died last year, lived literally 2 kilometers away from Universal. And we often used to sit out in her back garden and just watch the fireworks every night anyway, because it was so close. In terms of cutting edge technology for entertainment, there is nowhere on earth that comes anywhere close.
And would a day be enough if, say, my son and his wife and their 2 kids, who are 10 and 7, they decided to go over? What would be the sweet spot for going to one of the big 3? There's big 3, isn't it?
Big 3, yeah, but that's said and done. The big 3 between them now, well, as of 2 years' time, they'll actually have 8 individual parks between them. So you have to pay separately for each one. I think a lot of people bring their children to Florida too young. I think the best age is what you've just said there. Maybe 10, 11, 12, because a lot of the rides have height restrictions. And the last thing you want to do is bring a child who wants to go on everything, who's told they can't go on anything. So I would wait until the children are tall enough. I think it's usually between 48, 52 centimeters. The other thing is that you kind of want them to be engaged and remember it. And younger children will get tired very quickly, whereas older children won't. And because of that, if your children are in that slightly older bracket, the best thing to do is to maybe go in at lunchtime and stay until closing. It can be anything up to midnight in high season.
Wow.
What I used to do was go into the parks late and then maybe have dinner at 7 or something like that. And then after the parade in Disney especially, all the people with young kids go home, and the parade is, I think, at 8 o'clock. And then they clear out of the park and you have it to yourself. It's fantastic. I mean, there was one night I got on Splash Mountain, I think 6 times. I just stayed on it and just kept going around. So it really does pay to stay late.
Wow. And the length of these rides, roughly?
They vary. Something like Splash Mountain, I guess, would probably take about, that's a log flume ride. That would last probably 45 minutes. And then the shortest ones, I mean, some can be counted in seconds, the roller coasters especially.
Once you've paid your ticket, you don't have to pay anything else?
Not to get on anything else.
No. Do you have to buy your food separately?
Yes, you do. The one great thing about the States is they do obviously cater to all budgets and tastes.
Yes.
So you can go with your family and get, burgers and chips if you want to. And there are better dining options as well that are more expensive. Table service, that sort of thing, in all of the parks.
Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. You've whetted my appetite. Now, when you go to Orlando, and let's look at our family, like my son and his wife and his 2 kids, where would you suggest they stay?
The last time I was there was just before Christmas of 2022. I stayed at Universal's Endless Summer Resort, and it's fully geared towards families. And a lot of the rooms would have 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and stuff like that. And it wouldn't be a fully functioning kitchen, but it's enough that you can actually bring food back, or you can buy stuff in the supermarket and you can actually make a few things for yourself. So I think somewhere that basically is like an apart hotel would be the best for families. Or the other option I think that people should consider is if there are maybe a couple of families traveling together or a bigger family, there's a huge inventory of villas you can rent in that area, particularly down around Kissimmee, which is kind of close to Disney, but not so close to Universal. But the Interstate 4 goes between the two, and it's very easy to get around. I mean, the one great thing about my trips always was that my aunt and uncle obviously had 2 cars, and when I needed one, they just had me insured on theirs. So, I used to just drive everywhere when I was there myself, and it's very easy to drive. But yeah, I think a villa or an apartment is great for families. And then again, on International Drive, you'll find a lot of budget hotels. Rosen would be one group that has 3 or 4 hotels there, and the Rosens are very good value. Quality Inns are good value. They all have pools. They're clean. I stayed in once. It was basic, but it was like $60 a night or something. It was for nothing. Orlando has something for every budget. I mean, you can go really high end as well if you want to. The Swan and the Dolphin and Disney are beautiful hotels, but they're expensive. You have to choose. based on your wallet.
Yes. So you can also stay in the theme parks, or are there hotels that are associated with the theme parks?
Yeah, the Swan and the Dolphin and the Grand Floridian in Disney are Disney properties. In terms of Universal, the hotels would be run by chains like Lowe's and stuff like that. But the great thing about Universal is that the hotels obviously are on the wider campus. They're not within the theme park. They have one that's based on an Italian resort, and you can get a boat from there into the park itself. The same with the Hard Rock Hotel there as well. So, yeah, all the hotels are interconnected in some way, transportation wise, to get you to the park quickly. And also, the great thing is, if you stay on some of the on site properties, a lot of them offer you access to the park an hour before the general public. So, if there are rides that you really want to get on, the first thing you do is run straight for them. There are studies that show that if you go to the park, the best thing to do is to start your journey around the park anti-clockwise. For some reason, most people automatically go left when they walk into the park and they do the circuit that way. But if you go the opposite direction, you'll get the rides at that side of the park much quicker. And then when you meet, obviously, you'll have to queue, but it is easier to go right. Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible insider information. Any other advice on where to stay, particularly if you're not going to be invested in visiting theme parks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that people genuinely go there for any other reason, to be honest. If I were going to Central Florida just for a holiday, I would be going to the beach. New Smyrna Beach, quite close to Orlando, is actually fantastic. There are obviously other attractions for people who are a bit nerdy like myself. You can go down to Cape Canaveral and you can go around NASA and see space shuttles and all the Saturn rockets and get into the control room and all that sort of thing, which is absolutely fascinating. It's a really, really fascinating day out, I have to say.
Wow, that sounds absolutely fantastic.
I know.
And so that's all by flying into Orlando
Yes.
itself.
Yeah.
You could go to Orlando to do things like that, NASA and the whole Cape Canaveral
Yeah.
and
And also Daytona Beach is another fantastic beach. And you get Tampa on the other side. You can go to a beach like Clearwater. Clearwater is magnificent. It's one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, regularly voted that. Other places like Ybor City near Tampa, which is an old kind of Cuban area that's been completely repurposed. Now, I'm not a great fan of industrial areas becoming kind of twee, but that one I do like because it was the center of cigar production in the States for a long time. It's almost as if Guinness Brewery was repurposed with apartments and restaurants. In terms of Orlando as well, there's a brilliant place there called Rocco's Tacos on Sand Lake Road. And the great thing about that is it is very popular with Latinos who live in Florida. And they're very like us. It's party central. The same in Ybor City if you go down towards Tampa for the food, the music, etc. It's fantastic.
okay, there's some great options there. So where would you suggest eating and drinking?
International Drive runs the full length of Orlando from basically Orlando downtown, which is quite a bit north of the theme parks. It runs down to Disney effectively, or to the intersection for Disney. So International Drive has loads of hotels and restaurants, and a lot of them would be budget ones like Senor Frogs, which has a very good happy hour in the afternoon. And also there's a place there called Miller's Ale House. And for Irish people who actually do like to have a few pints, they've got about 35 beers on draft. But more to the point, they're a bit like Wetherspoons here. They're cheap. I like Rocco's Tacos there, as I've mentioned. And I like Seasons 52, which was my aunt's favorite restaurant. It's high end of not horribly expensive, if you're with me.
Yes.
And the great thing about it is that they have massive selections of wine by the glass, which is unusual here. And they do these brilliant little desserts in very small cups that I think are like $3 each. But what it basically means is you can actually taste all 5 or 6 of them and still not break the bank. And they do a lot of specials. I mean, the one thing I would say to people before you go to Orlando, have a look at anything you think you might want to do in terms of restaurants or shopping, which we'll come to, I'm sure. But download apps. Americans are still obsessed with coupons. Even today, I went on the website for Miller's Ale House just to see what prices were like nowadays because I haven't drunk there for a year. And the first thing that popped up was a $5 voucher off $30 spent. So just make sure that you've signed up for everything you can because you will get discounts.
Wow. Wow. Anything that you'd suggest our listeners sample as regards eating and drinking, which would be, unique to Orlando environment?
I love the United States. I mean, I've been 53 times, so it's somewhere I know very well. And the one thing about it is that I love getting home because just far too much of the food is fried. I think it starts to sap your energy, to be honest with you. I remember years ago, my cousins there were mad keen that I would try this onion. And the onion basically was a huge Spanish onion that had been sectioned, I think, into 16 bits, all of them dipped in batter, deep fried, and then reassembled. And they were like elated by it. I thought it looked like a football that had been deep fried. It was just hideous. You go into the likes of Olive Garden and you'll get like what to me looks like a half a kilo of deep fried scallions. It becomes depressing after a while.
Right.
So I would say search out something that's fresh.
And from the drink point of view, both alcohol and non-alcoholic,
Well, Florida's home for orange juice, so you're going to drink an awful lot of that.
is it really good? Can it be really
Oh, yeah,
good?
you get genuinely freshly squeezed. It's not the concentrate stuff you get elsewhere. It's fantastic. But in terms of alcohol, remember one thing, incidentally, if you have children with you who are old enough to drink in other parts of the world, they can't drink until they're 21 for starters. And the great thing is that I got talking to a barman once. I think at the time I was probably about 45 and he asked me for ID. And I kind of went, oh, gosh, that's amazing. You asked for ID. And he went, look, there was a lawsuit. There was somebody who was accused of discrimination by even asking. So now they just basically have to ask every third or fourth person whether they have a suspicion or not. So my little ego was built up and then immediately deflated. But yeah, I mean, the great thing about Florida and the States in general is sports bars. Even if you're not into the sports, I just love sitting at the counter in a sports bar and seeing literally 84 different sports on different screens and little groups of people who are interested in baseball or American football or tennis or whatever it is, you know, NASCAR, everything that is happening that day in sport is on a screen somewhere. Those bars will do brilliant happy hours, and happy hour can be like 4 hours. So pick your time of day to go. For any Irish people, and I know it's not just Irish people listening, but if you're there in July and you're worried about missing the All-Ireland hurling and football finals, the Lucky Leprechaun at the top of International Drive shows every GAA match going. So you will be able to see it.
Brilliant. What about shopping and Orlando for the shopaholics among our listeners?
It's brilliant. I think probably over the past 25, 30 years, I would say I've probably bought about 70% of my clothes there because you have two massive Simon premium outlets at either end of International Drive. You have the Florida Mall, which is more mainstream, and then you have the mall at Millennia, which is really high end. That's where you'll see your Dior and Versace and all that sort of thing. And also department stores like Nordstrom. But then in the Simon premium outlets, you have all the brands you would expect people to bring home. You've got your Tommy Hilfigers, Calvin Klein, Adidas, Nike, Reebok. I love Bath and Body Works. I bring back shower gel to last a year, effectively. It's usually like 3 for the price of 2, 5 for the price of 3. But then if you go on the website, you'll probably get a voucher for another 30% off. And pretty soon you leave the shop and they owe you money. So it's perfect.
Absolutely brilliant. Where would you suggest the exploration-minded among our listeners could go once they've arrived, they've set up in Orlando, they've done whatever they're doing, and they have a couple of days spare? What would you suggest for exploration?
To be honest with you, I'd hire a car, or there's a new high-speed train service as well now between Orlando and Miami. So get down to Miami for a couple of days and stay on South Beach. The Art Deco district there is just incredible. Brilliant hotels dating from the 30s and just a brilliant Latino vibe. I mean, Miami is the most Latino city in the States and just everything about it I love. I have never yet driven down to Key West, but I've been there. I stopped over on a cruise and Key West is fantastic as well. There's so much to do. Fort Lauderdale is a great place. A lot of people start their cruises there, but actually it's a very nice city to just spend a couple of days in as well. Years ago, I was on a computer training course in a place called Melbourne in Florida. And again, on the coast and beaches that people here probably really haven't heard of. And yet they're absolutely super. The Intracoastal Highway there is brilliant. A lot of these resort areas are basically on a sandspit, which is a bridge away from the actual mainland. It gives a kind of an otherworldly feel that you've actually gone to a different destination just by crossing a bridge.
Wow. And of course, you can take cruises. It's a great area to go off and explore if you're of that ilk.
It is. And a lot of people now are doing that. They'll have their week in Orlando first, and then they'll drive down or get a train down to Fort Lauderdale and take a cruise from there for a week. I suppose a lot of people still have in their mind that cruising is for retirees and stuff like that. Increasingly, the average age of cruisers is coming down quite dramatically because the ships now are like basically floating cities. I mean, the biggest one I was ever on, Oasis of the Seas, between passengers and crew, had 8,000 people on it. There are gardens with 30-foot high palm trees. There's an indoor shopping arcade. If you have an inside cabin with no window, there's actually a TV monitor on the wall that's linked to cameras on the outside of the ship. So you're actually getting this constant feed of what you'll be looking out a window at anyway. And they've water parks at sea now. They've got slides that go from the top deck to the bottom deck. The ship I was on last Christmas, Celebrity Edge, has this bar that hangs over the edge of the ship. And you literally can look straight down from deck 14 at the sea. And then later that day, it goes down to sea level because it's actually the embarkation point if you have to get tendered into shore. And you come back on, you get on, they give you your cold towel, your fruit juice, whatever. You go to your room. By the time you get back out, it's back up on deck 14, ready to be a bar again. So there's just a fantastic amount of innovation in the cruise industry. Some people have issues with these floating things, but actually they have also got more environmentally friendly. They have a bit to go, but it's better than it used to be.
Yes, because there was the whole thing about the diesel fuel and the dumping of the various waste of food. Just give me your quick take on the big three theme parks for those who are maybe considering going. What to pick and why of the big three, and what do they offer?
Disney, I would say, for the younger families with younger children, because most of the rides, they have started to bring a few more in that are faster, but most of the rides are family rides. Even Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, which technically is a roller coaster, is no more scary than something you'd get in Wonderland at Christmas. So Disney definitely is the best for kids and probably the best for wonder in the sense of being astonished. Whereas the others are a bit more tailored towards teenagers and older adults. Universal would be my favorite because, again, it has the best roller coasters. And SeaWorld is rapidly catching up on that front with Mako, and Kraken has always been one of my favorite coasters as well. It's floorless, so your legs are kind of swinging around as you go as well. I like the vibe of SeaWorld. I'm glad that they're stopping the whale shows and stuff like that. That does nothing for me. I don't like to see animals in captivity. And so what they've also done is they've invested very heavily in a nighttime show, again, with lots of lasers and fireworks and very cheesy dance routines, but it's all part of the fun. And the thing about Orlando, I think, is that you have to park your cynicism. There's no point in going there if all you're going to do is look around and say, God, it's so bloody American or whatever. That's the whole point. Everything is brash. It's in your face. So I would say, yeah, Disney for younger kids, Universal for adults who never grew up like me, and SeaWorld, combination of both.
Okay. And the optimum time to give to theme parks, how many days would you say?
Well, realistically, if you wanted to see everything and do it at a leisurely pace, you would need 4 days for Disney alone.
Wow.
You definitely need 3 for Universal if you wanted to also go to the Volcano Bay, the water park there.
And the Harry Potter.
Harry Potter is part of, there are 2 parks. There's the Universal Studios Park, and then there's Islands of Adventure. And Harry Potter actually very cleverly straddles both, which means that to see all of Harry Potter, you actually need 2 days passes, or else buy a 2-park pass for 1 day, which is more expensive.
Wow.
It's part of the main parks, so you don't have to buy a separate ticket for it, but you will have to buy 2 tickets to see it all. Yeah.
Is there finally a hidden gem that you could recommend?
That's an interesting one. There's nothing at all to downtown Orlando, I have to say, but there is a suburb called Winter Park, which is worth a visit because it's where actual Floridians live, and it has a great history, a lot of Art Deco architecture. Great place to just take a day out and chill, have a wander around, and just go to the cafes and the restaurants and the shops there because it's not touristy and it's 20, 25 minutes from everywhere else. It's just a chance to see a different Florida, let's say.
And finally, your verdict on why our listeners should go if they haven't been to Orlando. Why would they go, in your opinion?
I think maybe you probably should go to just remind yourself occasionally of what it was like to be a kid, because everything in the parks especially is designed to evoke an emotion of some description, whether it's fear or happiness or joy or whatever. Literally everywhere you look, there is something that you will want to do, whether that's sit in a sports bar all day while your children go on the rides, whether that's going on the rides yourself, whether it's going to a cheesy show, whether it's just standing in awe as fireworks and lasers light up the sky. It's just a magical entertainment space that everybody, I think, should see once.
Thank you Philip. And I just ask our listeners that if you've enjoyed this show, just share it with one of your friends. And really, I think what Philip has done for me is captured the wonder of travel. We will put down references on a fact sheet to all the places that Philip has talked about, so you can go on www, the Top Travel Destinations website, and follow up if there are any leads that particularly find beguiling. But I'm definitely going to think about myself and the grandkids going out to Orlando, and that's all thanks to you, Philip. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Kevin.